Hi guys, so today I'm going to be showcasing you the Necromancer raid build that I've come up with the help of Nedra on the Discord Necro community. He's kind of a guy that I bounce ideas around and he bounces ideas to me, and it's nice to be able to have someone that I can do that with, you know, on a regular basis. I believe he's from a different region to I am, so the time barrier can be quite difficult sometimes, but we still throw the ideas around. But we've come up with kind of between us a build that we believe is probably going to be the best kind of raid build that you can possibly do when it comes to doing damage. Now I will show you the build going after these raids that I'm just going to do. The build does great damage. You will see in the raid itself, you know, how much damage it can actually do. But I will show you all as well on the dummy when we come out, kind of the damage it can put out. So. And the minute timers that I've been doing is, I've been getting like 350 million on average in a minute, and I was fairly happy with that damage. You know, 350 million a minute is pretty good, just as a static build that you're not doing any kind of movement when you're attacking a dummy. So dummies are kind of, they're a good thing to test, but I believe, you know, going and actually testing it in a raid environment does give you different results, as you can see here. You know, I was able to put out 54, nearly 55 million damage, which is 15 mil above the other guy. So I feel that that was quite a successful raid. So yeah, this one we should see a bit more damage going around. This one definitely a one of those fights where you can just pump out the damage. You know, it easily goes down, smashing out the damage here, and you can see like 9 million damage a second. You know, incredible amounts of damage when you get just a static fight. Absolutely incredible. Should be very similar on this one. It's just a standard fight. You know, there's a phase. Already smashing out the DPS. We got some ads, so we get some AoE damage in here as well, which is always nice to add. But boss is down. Smashing the damage, no problem whatsoever. I think going into the next difficulty, into Inferno 5, into Inferno 6, depending on what new legendaries we get, new essences we get in the coming patches, this one should test quite well going forward. Now, I've yet to try this in Gauntlet. Being as a Gauntlet is such a high CR requirement now, we're not there yet. Once Gauntlet does become available to me, I will definitely test this build out in that environment, because the nerf to Parting Gift that we had, I don't think we're going to be using Parting Gift anymore in any of the builds. It was just such a hard nerf that they give to it that I'm wondering what it entails for us in these harder raids now when we go into doing Gauntlets. It's going to be interesting to see, you know. Can we pump out the damage? I don't think we can. I think there's going to be too many people that are above me on that fight. Not a fight for Necromancers, really. Well, as you can see, the build works really well. So I will now go and show you kind of what it can do on the target dummy. All my cooldowns should have reset, including the internal cooldowns. So we should be able to kind of give you a demonstration on what this can do. And then I will go into the build and show you exactly what the build is, what the green sets are, the skills, you know, everything we normally go through. So we'll do a kind of a minute test. You watch for the 10-second burst. The 10-second burst is pretty good on this as well. So, yeah, it's absolutely insane. Ten seconds, we're still doing the 7 million DPS. It will start to slowly drop now. Internal cooldowns we're waiting for. We will pick it back up to hopefully around a 6 million. Once my internal cooldowns come back off a cooldown, you can slowly see it going up. We're back above the 6. We'll slow down again. We're waiting for them internal cooldowns. We should get another round of them before we finish on the minute mark. Can we bring it above 6 this time round? We're over the 300 mil in under a minute, which I think is a good place to be. And we're going to end around 340 million near as damn it. You can see the damage kind of roll out there. It's yeah, it works quite well. You know, your most damage is going to be your corpse lance, so it's a very similar build to what we run in a lot of our setups, apart from we've got mages in this build. So going forward with the skills you will be using in this build, you're going to be using Bone Spear. We're going to be using Bone Armor, Grim Scythe, Corpse Lance, and Skeletal Mages. With this kind of setup, it's perfect for this build for going through raids. Now, gear-wise, I've tested this so many times to find out kind of what would be our best setup, and this is what I'm stuck with. So we're going with Studied Menace, which, as we all know, puts a decay on our Corpse Lance, so it's dealing damage over 3 seconds to the enemy. We are then going with Unfilled Grave, so which is Bone Armor now consumes nearby corpses to increase the damage you deal and reduce the damage you take for each corpse consumed. It also reduces the cooldown of Bone Armor. We are then going to be taking Executive Disconnect, or Discontent, sorry. In this one it says increases all damage dealt by 9.5% for each skeletal mage you have active. So most of the time we're going to have 2 active, so we're going to be getting nearly a 20% increase in damage going forward. Then we have the Raving Silence, which we use in most of our builds. Grim Scythe now triggers all of the conditional damage on the target's hits, causing them to instantly take the remaining damage, and it obviously recalls the cooldown is reduced of Grim Scythe as well by here 3.6%. We then go with Defiling Swarm, another one that we use in most of our builds. Grim Scythe now conjures whirling scythes that orbit around you, dealing damage and generating lots of corpses, so we can obviously use them with our other skills. We are then using Departed Appetite for our Corpse Lance. Consumes nearby corpses to create a vortex of bones around you, which deal a lot of damage to enemies. Corpse Lance damage is increased by 18%. Now this is one I went to and fro, so Blightmoor I've decided to stick with. Bone Spear also poisons enemies hit for 13,000 damage over 3 seconds, and it increases the damage of Bone Spear by 90% here, which is absolutely insane. Now the other one that I was looking at, I will go through and show you the other build that kind of you could use items in here, what you could change out. But the last item on the list that I'm currently using is the new Scattered Light Spectral Mage. Skeletal Mage now summons an untargetable Spectral Mage that casts Hungering Soulfire at enemies. After being struck by a total loss of control effect, a Spectral Mage can sacrifice itself to remove the effect. Additionally, Spectral Mages will be summoned passively while you're in combat. So here, you will actually have one that passively kind of spawns while you're in combat. And then if you use the ability itself, you get 2 more. So going back to Executive Discontent, you will actually have a massive amount of damage increase, because you're going to have most of the time 3 mages up. So nearly 30% increase in all damage you deal. So this is kind of a must-have in my mind. Now before we get onto the sets, I'll show you other things that I had tried out, and the same with Nedra, he had tried these out as well, and we both came to the same conclusion. So Blightmoor, you could swap that over to Wicked Husker, to obviously do a increase in your critical hit damage that the enemies take for 3.2 seconds. It's a good armor break, and it does help the whole group as a whole because it affects everyone. But in damage wise, me and Nedra both found that Blightmoor was definitely the better matchup here for the extra damage you're getting from this, as well as your Raving Silence when it's kind of resetting that every time. Other things that you could potentially change, you could change this helm, Studied Menace, to potentially go with a Grim Scythe, the Gate Fisk helm. I think it does still do less damage, but it is another option if you want to kind of switch things up. Going on to the set items. So we're going with a standard 2-piece Vifus for the increase of duration on your beneficial effects and your party members' beneficial effects by 30%. We are then going in with 4-piece Agment set. So the duration of any Ignite status is increased by 30%, and then the 4-piece is going to give you a 15% chance to attach an Ignite status to the enemy, which deals a damaging over time effect for nearly 21,000 damage over 3 seconds, which is going to be reset by Raving Silence. The next set I'm going for is 2-piece Barons, which is just going to increase the duration of harmful effects on the targets. So any duration or effect you're adding will obviously be increased, and obviously when you're deleting that with Raving Silence, that will obviously be applied. So, Legendary Gems. Now, this has been quite an interesting one. I've tried numerous different ones out over the last few days, and just seeing which ones you can use and which ones is not really worthwhile using. Now, the Legendary Gems, I've gone through them, and I've gone from being around about 1600 reso to nearly 3000 reso. And I must say there is a sweet spot. I think, you know, the 2800, 2700 upwards is a sweet spot for this build. Now, don't get me wrong, you can use this build at lower levels of reso. But I think overall, simply because of the damage that these gems can put out, and the benefits they have, I think it's hard to skip out on some of these. But I have got some ideas of what you could do if you don't have some of these gems, and ones you could put in potentially to probably not see as much damage as I'm seeing, because you won't. You know, that is a big disclaimer I have to put out there. The damage that I'm dealing, you won't see unless you're going to go with the same setup as me. And then you may get on the same sort of level of 300 plus mark on the DPS, on the damage for the minute. But I could still see you easily, depending on your reso, doing, you know, 200, 250. I know Nedra, he sits around, I believe, about 2400 reso, and he smashes the damage. He absolutely smashes it for his level. I think sometimes he even pushes the 300 million over the minute, even 350. So it is possible. It does all depend on them internal cooldowns. But let's get into the Legendary Gems, tell you what I'm taking, tell you what I've tried, show you what works, and show you what doesn't. So, the first Legendary Gem that I tested that I don't normally use is Entropic Well. Now, this is going to increase all skill damage by 18%, as well as increase your attack speed by 4%, which is an incredible amount of damage to increase your skills by. I have tried numerous different things in replace of this, Viper's Bite, you know, and I found that this is just outputting so much damage. We're then using Pain Clasp, which is going to increase the damage dealt by 24% to enemies suffering from continuous damage and effect. And when they're suffering from continuous damage effects within 10 yards, you increase your movement speed. One that you might not all have, so a Morn Skull. It's going to increase your damage by 18% or up to 36% if at least 3 enemies were drained with this Royal Dominion, which lasts 6 seconds. One that we all know very well, Mother's Lament. When you deal damage, you have a 20% chance to gain a buff which increases your critical hit chance by 32% for 6 seconds. This has an internal cooldown of 20 seconds, so that is when I was saying doing the damage, we're waiting for cooldowns. This would be one of the cooldowns we're waiting for. Next up, I use Bottled Hope. It increases my damage and movement speed when I grant myself a buff. So every time I'm using any buff, it's going to increase that damage I deal. Now this also has a 20-second cooldown. So when I'm waiting for cooldowns, them internal cooldowns, I'm waiting for these to kind of rebuff me so I can increase my damage up to that kind of 6 million mark per second. Next up, we're using Roiling Consequences. Now, when you're dealing damage, you have a chance of going into a Roiling Rage, during which you have a 30% increase in critical hit chance. And it also puts a burn on the enemies, which then does a 36% base damage over 3 seconds. Now, I'm not sure. I believe this does work with Raving Silence, but don't quote me on that. But this obviously then increases your crit hit chance against burning enemies by 6% when they're on there. So, you know, if it does work, you're going to get that increased damage against them. And even if it doesn't work, you're going to be just passively doing that more damage anyway. Next up, we've got Blood-Soaked Jade. Increases damage just by a flat rate 17% while at full life and 8.5% while at low life, and increases your movement speed, which is just great. And then I'm using the good old Berserker's Eye, which is just going to increase your damage by 16% and critical hit chance by 2%, but it does have that negative of increases all damage you take by 5%. So that is my setup. You can see I have got my other gems in my gear because they're obviously all awakened, all the right levels, so that's absolutely fine. Now, ones you could swap in is you could add a Viper's Bite in here if you don't have Morn Skull, for instance. You could add a Misery Elixir in here if you don't have Morn Skull, for instance. You could also add in a Fervent Fang. Now, Fervent Fang is an interesting one because it does... I've only got a level 6. But every time you deal damage to an enemy, that enemy now takes a 1.7% increased damage from your attacks, up to a maximum of 17% at 10 stacks. Now, at rank 10, this does incredible amount of damage. And it also increases damage you deal to elite and boss monsters by 3%. So this would be great to add in replace of, say, a Morn Skull, if you do have this at rank 10. Free-to-play players, you may not have this at rank 10. You may not even have one. So if you don't, then I would recommend either using... a Viper's, a Misery Elixir, or something that's just going to give you another increase in flat damage. Now, going on to the Paragon. Paragons, I am using Slinger. Been mixtures about kind of what's the best setup for this as well, but we have settled for Uncanny, Unseen Dynamism, Gifted, Bloodthirst, and then Superiority. Now, I have mixed up so many different versions of this, but this is the best build that I've come up with. So, Uncanny, while you have 10 or more stacks of Unseen Dynamism, you will gain Uncanny, which increases your crit hit chance by 6.5%. Unseen Dynamism, now gain a stack of Unseen Dynamism as you hit enemies with either your primary or skill, and the attacks must alternate between primary attack and skill to build stacks. Now, this just automatically works. It's just great. Unseen Dynamism will increase your damage by 1% for every stack, up to 10 stacks for 3 seconds. So it's an increase in 10% damage. It's great. Now, Unseen Dynamism with Gifted can stack up to 15 times. So you've just got a massive amount of damage increase just by taking Gifted. Bloodthirst, using a skill 1 in combat, increases the damage you deal to monsters by 1% for 10 seconds. Bosses are monsters, so yep. Bloodthirst stacks up to 5 times, but all stacks are removed when you take damage. So you want to be mindful of that. Try and move out the way of damage. But yeah, if you happen to take damage, then you will lose obviously some of your DPS. And lastly, Bloodthirst and Fury now stack up to 10 times. So as we're only taking Bloodthirsty, this is now going to stack up to 10 times instead of the 5 times. For the legendary Paragon skill, you can go in with Lightning Rod. Absolutely fine too. I prefer Death's Release. We're going to be resetting these continual damage and effects on our targets by obviously using Raving Silence. So as their effects expire each time on a 10-second internal cooldown, you're going to be dealing 30% of their total damage to all nearby enemies as well. So any kind of adds that a raid boss has got, this is just great to use. To the Reforges that you should be going for this sort of build is going to be very similar or the same as what we would take for anything else really. We could do with having another set of these instead of just the 2 that you can build, for one for PvE and one for PvP. I would like to have, you know, maybe 1 or 2 more, and then some ways of earning some more Reforged stones so we can actually, you know, test a lot of this stuff out. So in my bonus PvE one that I've got set up for the Reforges, I have the damage to enemies suffering loss of control effects. Now this is used in challenge dungeons. Damage to demons, and then I have attack speed. On every piece of gear you should definitely have beneficial effects for their Reforge, and then I take crit hit damage. I have tried all skill damage increase here, and it does work, but I think the crit hit damage is probably the better one to go for. But test that to see what you think, and let me know your opinions on that one. But this is the kind of setup you should go in for all of your gear. You know, I think I've got that on every single piece of gear now, having the Vengeance set as the buff. Yeah, again here, loss of control, demons, attack speed, beneficial effects, and crit hit damage to gain this bonus family damage for the extra 100% damage for 1 second, a 2% chance. I've got that on all 8. So, other than that, really, there's not much more to tell you about the build. You know, you've got the Reforges, you've got everything else that you need. the main stats to really go for in the build. I could kind of mention that to you. Crit hit chance, crit hit damage are playing a big role in this. The attack speed is nice because you're going to get your primary attack speed off quicker, and it does increase the speed of your skills. So I think if you can get attack speed on your gear with either crit hit damage or crit hit chance, this build is going to work very well for you. Going over to a familiar. Familiars don't work on target dummies at the moment, so this is kind of an issue. So the damage you're seeing is not a true amount, because with the familiar, you do have a thing called lingering wounds. This skill here, enemies affected by abnormal status from the familiar's active skill will take 15.47% more damage for 3 seconds. So that is a 15.5% increase in damage that I'm dealing to that target for 3 seconds. So you can see I'm losing out on that simply because the minion will not attack. If you look at my minion now, he just will not attack it. He's just standing next to me. He's not doing anything. This is something that Blizzard needs to fix. So if they are watching this video and they get to this point, please fix our familiars with the training dummies. We are kind of getting frustrated by it. It's something that is very annoying when we can't test builds out properly, and we need it fixed. But other than that, I think this is a very interesting raid build. As I mentioned, I'm not too sure if it's going to work in Gauntlet. I have no reason to say it won't, but there may be some other kind of twists we can do to help the group in Gauntlet to kind of face their more difficult challenges. But yeah, I think I've enjoyed kind of building this build up with Nedra, and yeah, you know, kudos to him for sticking with me and not mind me pestering him, bouncing ideas from him. Because that's just great having someone I can do that with, and I do it in the Discord community in general, not on the main Discord for Diablo Immortal. So if you're not part of that community, I definitely recommend getting part of that community. I think we'll leave the video there. There's not really much more I can say about this build. I hope you kind of enjoy it, and if you think of any changes that you kind of think I've missed, then do mention them in the comments below. As always, I want to thank the members of the community that have still the only 2 that are supporting the community at the moment. If you do want to become a member, feel free to do that. You know, I am looking at building ourselves a Discord server so we can obviously, you know, chat on there away from the main Discord and have our own, you know, chats about just Necromancers and just the game in general. But yeah, that's still work in progress, so bear with me on that one. But we'll leave it there. We'll see you in the next one.